Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast.
You are now listening to season 6 of the show.
I'm your host, Rob Hanna. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Eli Albrecht. Eli studied for his bachelor's degree in business administration and management at the Johns Hopkins University before his JD at Georgetown University Law Center. Eli served as a staff sergeant in the Israeli Defense Forces and was a Krav Maga and police defensive tactics instructor. Eli spent time as a law intern in the Maryland Court of Special Appeals and in Pennsylvania. He was previously a summer associate and associate at DLA Piper, specializing in private equity, M&A, financing, and commercial real estate acquisitions. At present, Eli is a mergers and acquisitions associate at Gibson Dunn. He documents being a father, husband, and lawyer on social media. Eli is also passionate about sharing how his faith guides his values personally and professionally. So, a very, very warm welcome, Eli!
Hey, Rob, it is so good to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Well, we're delighted to have you. And before we dive into all your amazing projects, experiences to date, we have a customary icebreaker question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, what would you rate the hit TV series Suits in terms of its reality?
This is a tough question, and I hope it's the hardest hitting question in this entire segment. Suits, I have to rate an 11 out of 10. Incredibly realistic, accurate, and for all the young law students out there, you can definitely be Harvey Specter or Meghan Markle or whoever you want. Go for it. You can do it. It's super realistic.
I love it. And with that, we're sticking with that 11, and that's on the record, and we're moving swiftly on. So to begin with, Eli, do you mind telling our listeners a bit about your background and journey?
Absolutely. So I have a bit of a meandering background and journey. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is a small town, but I grew up in a very urban, you would call it a low socioeconomic neighborhood of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And low socioeconomic just means poor. So that's translation. And I struggled as a kid. I went to a private Jewish school. My parents are Orthodox Jewish. And when my fifth grade teacher told me that I would never amount to anything, and then decided it would be a good idea to relay the message to my mom that I would never amount to anything, my mom pulled me out of school and homeschooled me for 2 years. And I learned everything in those 2 years that I did not learn in all the rest of my years in this school. So major credit to my mom. She got me up to proficiency, and then I ended up skipping 8th grade and going into high school. And I went to a public high school. It was our neighborhood high school. It was pretty rough. It was very rough. I wore my kippah, which is like this traditional Jewish head covering, on the first day of school. And I remember the first day of school, it was snatched off my head, and I ended up getting in a fight with somebody over that. And there were consistent fights and scraps, and it was sort of a way of life there. Very much a dog-eat-dog environment. And I didn't care much for school or academics. I didn't go to many classes, and I got only the grades necessary to stay on the wrestling team, which was my main passion at the time. So I wrestled throughout high school. And then during high school, 9/11 happened, and for Americans who grew up of my vintage, 9/11 was a major, impactful event in our lives. And like many others, 9/11 hit me hard. I was shattered about the lives that were lost, but it was really a impact on my innocence, and I realized that there was some nasty forces out there, and that there was real negative forces that needed to be combated. And I was angry. I was a young teenager. I was going through a hard time anyway, and I was very angry after 9/11. And so I started to focus on the military and started to focus on how I could contribute to the U.S. military. And I started training for the Special Forces or for an aviation position. And then I had a second thing that occurred as a young teenager, and that was the lynching in Jenin in the West Bank in Israel. And Jewish people of my vintage also recognize that as a very impactful event. But for many others, this was a story of 3 reserve soldiers who accidentally took the wrong path into Jenin, which is a refugee city in the West Bank of Israel, and they were brought into the police station and torn apart. They were mutilated and cut open and in many really awful ways I won't go into here. But I remember opening the Wall Street Journal as a young teenager and seeing a Palestinian man leaning outside the window of the police station, and his hands were bloodied with the blood of the Jewish soldiers that had been killed at that time. And that hit me really hard because I was also at the time delving into the story of my grandparents and my grandmother, who was the sole survivor from a very wealthy, well-to-do German family in Stuttgart. And she escaped as a young teenager, about the age that I was, 13, 14 years old, from Germany with the clothes on her back, and the rest of her family were murdered there. So the 9/11 impact, and then the Jenin lynching, and then connecting with my grandmother, I realized that I would like to contribute militarily, but I want to contribute in Israel. And so I made a decision at the time, being 16 years old, that I would go over to Israel and serve in the Israeli Defense Forces. And so as a junior in high school, I dropped out and I went over there, and then I ended up serving in the military there before coming back to the States for school.
Well, thank you so much for being so open, and what some of the, tragic experiences, happened as you went through your sort of journey. But, let's dive into a few bits, because you made the comment that you studied, but you weren't a big fan of going to too many lectures or too many classes. But you did study your business administration and management at the Johns Hopkins University before going on to complete your JD. So where did the interest in law particularly stem from?
Absolutely. So I did study at Johns Hopkins University, which is a fantastic institution, and somehow I made it in. But even before that, something I don't speak about openly, but I've recently realized it's important for me to say, is that I attended community college for 2 years prior to going to Johns Hopkins. And community college in the States is I don't know how it compares to college in Britain, but it is sort of a college that have no requirements for entry. Anybody can enter, anybody can matriculate into community college. And I did, and I remember going there on my first day and taking an entrance exam, and I scored so low in math, having not done any high schooling, that they told me I had to take 2 classes before I started getting credit for math. So I had to go all the way back, and the same with English and grammar. I had to take non-credit classes before starting to get credit. So I attended community college alongside amazing, motivated students, kids that were putting everything on the line in order to go there. Most of us had full-time jobs and attended in the evening. So I remember working my full-time job and then going there at 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. for classes. And it really separates the wheat from the chaff when you have to attend at that hour of the night. But so, and then after that, I did very well there. I really realized how much I loved learning. I loved studying. I loved academia. I really grew a love for it, and the professors were amazing there. And I did well there and transferred to Johns Hopkins University. And so where did my interest in law come from? I never had an interest in law growing up. I have no lawyers in my family, and so when I went to college, I wanted to be an industrial psychologist. And I love the way human behavior works. I love the role that humans play in business. And so industrial psychology married the two, and I thought that's what I would do. And I also knew a mentor at one time in my life who was a psychologist, and he told me, you could be a psychologist too. And I believed him, and so that's what I thought I could do. And when I was in undergrad, I met my then girlfriend, now wife. And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do industrial psychology. I love this field. It's beautiful. And, somebody I knew did it, and I could do it. And I remember her stopping and looking at me, and she said, why? And I said, well, I think I can do it. And she said, well, you can do anything. You could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, you could be a developer, you could do anything you want. You're smart, you do well in school, and what would you like to be? And growing up in the environment that I grew up in, I didn't have any concept that I could do whatever I wanted to do. my view on what I could do was very myopic. It was, if I knew somebody who did that, I could do that. And I didn't meet any lawyers growing up. I met very few doctors growing up. I didn't know that I could do anything until my wife told me, anything is possible, and I could do anything. And so then I sat back and I said, you know what? I really like the idea of being a lawyer. I love the idea of advocating for someone else. I love the idea of business law, right? It marries my love for business and my love for advocacy for others. And so then I settled on business law and I changed to be pre-law focused in undergrad, and then set my sights on law school.
And the rest is history, and it's been a success story thereafter. But I do want to quickly just rewind, because you mentioned and touched on it before, because you did serve as a staff sergeant in the Israeli Defense Force. So how long did you serve for, and what were your experiences like there?
So as you can probably gather, I cannot talk about many of the things that I did there. I served in the Special Forces in a undercover counter-terror unit for most of my service. There is a Netflix show, it's not a documentary, made based on the unit I served in called Fauda. You can go check that out, but I probably can't talk about much more there. I did have incredible experiences, especially during training, where I realized that one can push themselves far beyond what we think is possible. And so I remember that we would take very frequent tests, and they were fitness tests, and they were psychological tests and psychometry tests, in order to continue on to the next rung in the training. And I was taking a test once, and it was a 3-kilometer run. And you were supposed to do this run as fast as possible, and we were graded based on our times. And I went to my officer at the time, and I said, do you have any technique for doing this run? Right? I had been starting out sort of pacing myself in the beginning, and then slowly increasing until I got to the end. And he looked at me and he said to me, Eli, start out running as fast as you possibly can. You cannot run any faster than you start out, and then slowly increase your pace throughout the run. And so that lesson I thought was fantastic, right? Which is that you start working, you start doing as much as you possibly can, and then you slowly find that you can actually do more than that. And so that's a lesson that I took with me for the rest of my life, and I think about it almost daily.
It's a really good lesson, and I've never thought of things that way, but it's so true. And going through the gears and kind of getting yourself forward. Absolutely love that. And I love the impersonation as well. I don't know how accurate it was. He can be the judge of that. And folks, if you finished binge watching Tiger King, catching up on Carol Baskin's episodes when we had her on the show, you can go and binge on Ellie's episode on Netflix now too. So going back to the law then, you spent some time as a law intern at the Honourable Judge Paul E. Alpert in Maryland Court of Special Appeals. So how did you come across that opportunity, and what is some of the work you got involved there, and what was most enjoyable for you?
That's a good question, actually, how I came across that opportunity, because I was, I think, in undergrad, or maybe it was the summer between, and I met Judge Paul Alpert at synagogue, and I hate synagogue. I've always hated synagogue growing up. I've grown to love it as an older adult, and I bring my kids to synagogue. But as a kid, I absolutely hated it. I hated the rigor of sitting and praying, and I never understood why I did it as a kid. And I hated being told what to do. So I hated going to synagogue. But as I got older, I really grew to love it. And one of the things, aside from the deep inspiration I get while I pray and the communal aspects of getting together and praying with other Jewish people, is that it creates an incredible network of people that share my values. And so Judge Alpert was somebody in my synagogue who shared a lot of my values, and we started talking, and he said, Ellie, why, if you want to learn about the law, why don't you come intern with me? And I did, and I absolutely loved it. But my takeaway here is that a lot of people think that you get jobs by going online and applying for those jobs. But I do think that creating value-based communities and being part of those value-based communities, whether they're veteran communities or people of color or women's communities, are so incredibly important for locating mentors and locating opportunities. And I encourage people, it's not cheating to use your network to succeed, right? And there are people like me and many others who love helping people come up, and at every stage throughout my career, I had somebody reach down and grabbed my bootstraps and helped me up. And that's something I like to give back on now. And so Judge Albrecht was one of those people who reached down and helped me up.
I love that story, and you touch on so many things, and people who listen to the show will be fed up of me banging on about this. The power of community, network, every day be growing that, because your network is your net worth. It's well overused, but it's so true, and what a casing example there, and the value of mentorship. So thank you, Ellie, for showcasing that. And I also loved you touched on the end. Something else that I'm passionate about is about sending the elevator back down, right? Once you've reached, you teach, and I love that you're giving back and suggesting that to others too. So, from those interning experiences and securing that role, and great example you gave there, you've obviously worked for some pretty cool, awesome firms. But prior to your current firm, 𝐤𝐻𝐿 Dunn, you were a summer associate specializing in PE, M&A, financing, commercial real estate. So did you choose to specialize in those areas, or did it just sort of happen for you?
I chose to. I always had an interest in business law and venture capital, private equity, and that brought me to M&A, mergers and acquisitions. I have a passion for real estate as well. I love the way real estate works. So at 𝐤𝐻𝐿 Dunn, at my current firm, I was given the opportunity. We have a free market system, which means you can choose the work that you want to do, and you get more work based on merit and based on how well you do in that work, and you create relationships, and we're sort of have to be entrepreneurial in that sense. So I was able to pick up both M&A and real estate as a young associate, and I've always loved the way business works behind the scenes, right? We see the results of the buildings that have gone up in New York or in London, and we see the successful exits, and we read about them in the Wall Street Journal. But I love what happens behind the scenes to get that done. And so that has always been my interest, and that's what I started out doing as a young lawyer.
Love it. And I'm going to go back to now where you gave Harvey Specter, everyone can be a Harvey, and you gave it 11 suit. So, Harvey can turn his hand to anything, right? He's an anything lawyer. So you gave some good examples of where your interest stemmed from there. But breaking it down in simple terms for folks that are probably interested or want to learn more, what is M&A that's banded around, mergers, and how's that applicable in the legal world? Break it down in simple terms for us.
So M&A is really a mystery, and if you need somebody to do it, you have to call an M&A lawyer. So that's it. No, but I do want to take a step back and say that one of the reasons I was initially interested in M&A is that it was a very prestigious position. And in my view, in law school, the M&A lawyers were the ones who dressed well, who were brilliant structuring lawyers, who were able to solve complex and challenging problems for clients under intense pressure. And I wanted to be somebody who not only was successful in law, but also had a successful title, has successful prestige. And we can talk about the insecurities that made me want to do that, and whether it's a positive thing that I've sort of come to understand in my later years may be caused by that insecurity I had growing up. But that's what I wanted to do. And so mergers and acquisitions is when a lawyer, in the legal sense, is when a lawyer represents somebody who's either acquiring or selling a business. So you can merge a business or you can acquire it, but really that has to do with structuring. But in a basic sense, somebody, usually a private equity fund or a business, is going out and is buying another business. In the most simple terms, there are thousands of pages of agreements that memorialize exactly how that purchase is being made, who's responsible for what, how the payments are being made, how this is going to work on a go-forward basis. But in very, very simple terms, there are two businesses. Post-transaction, there is one business.
There we go. And we like simplistic language. So thank you for breaking that down so well for us there, Ellie. But, whilst at 𝐤𝐻𝐿 Dunn, there's no doubt been lots of memorable cases that you've worked on today. What's been your favorite project you've been exposed to?
That is a great question. I have thankfully been involved in lots of amazing deals with incredible people, both here at 𝐤𝐻𝐿 and at my prior firm. As a first-year associate, I got to work on the Sprint T-Mobile merger. It was a $26.5 billion merger. it was very exciting, and I got to do a very small piece of that as a young lawyer. But later, a few years later, I was able to take a more outsized role in the acquisition by Platinum Equity, which is a big private equity group out of Los Angeles, out of California, for the $4.5 billion acquisition of McGraw-Hill. McGraw-Hill is a textbook company that does not only textbook, but online e-learning now. And that was a fantastic deal, fantastic acquisition, not only because it was front page on the Wall Street Journal, but also because it had incredible challenges. But what makes deals enjoyable for me has more to do with the people that I work with and than the actual deal itself. And the partner on this deal and the senior associate on this deal were both incredibly supportive people. And even though we put in very long hours, more all-nighters on that deal than I've ever done on any other deals, the team that I worked with on that deal were encouraging. They brought each other up, and they were just pleasant and enjoyable to work with. So, when you're on the phone with somebody at 3 a.m., it's nice to be able to make jokes with that person. And that's what makes the deal enjoyable. And that's, to me, what make the deals memorable.
Yeah, and I love that you talk about culture and people, because I say energy is everything, and the people that you're surrounding yourself well, where you're on the deal and you're all trying to get the deal done, and being surrounded by those people and inspired by those people will definitely get you through. So we're going to switch it up a little bit, and this is another topic that I'm super passionate about: social media, because you have amassed a tremendous amount of followers online. You have over 30,000 on LinkedIn alone. So how did you start your LinkedIn journey, and what prompted you to start putting yourself out there?
That's a very good question, and I should really develop a founder story around this now that things have really taken off, because the real story is not as glamorous as the story I need to make up. But because we're just among friends here, Rob, I'll give you the real story.
Go on.
Just promise not to tell anybody here.
I won't.
So I was going through a particularly rough period a couple years back as an associate. And like I said, the people are really what's most impactful for me at my job. I love the work, but it's really the people that make or break things. And I was working with some challenging people, and there are lawyers out there who view other people as humans. And there are lawyers out there who, for some reason, are much more mechanical and have a hard time viewing the humanity in other people. And to me, that's abrasive, and that's difficult for me to deal with. And I remember coming home one day, and I said to my wife, like, this is tough. Like, I'm a person. I want to be treated like a person. I've never talked to these people about my family, my children. I want them to know that I have loves outside of work, that I have passions, that I have hobbies, and how can I relate this to them? And she said, well, just get on the phone and tell them. And I said, no, that's not really the way it works. I can't really, there's no time. We're running on deals. We're extremely stressed. There's really no time to communicate it. And so she said to me, you're connected with all of them on LinkedIn. Just start posting about like who you are, what are your values. And she said, you're going through this. There are probably thousands of other people who are also going through this. And if you can impact them and help them to feel a little bit better about their challenges, then it will all be worth it. And so at the time, that's what I did. I started posting about who I was, what my values are, my family, the things I think about, the things I struggle with. And I tried to do it in the most open and honest way in case there were other people who were also feeling the way I was feeling. And like you said, the rest is history. It turns out there are thousands of other people who are feeling exactly how I'm feeling.
Time for a short break from the show. Are you looking for a way to get your firm working more efficiently and profitably while ensuring a better work-life balance for your team? Well, if you haven't considered our sponsor, 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐭𝐞𝐧𝐢𝐬𝐿, I'm here to strongly recommend that you do. I absolutely love working with 𝐤𝐢𝐬𝐬. Not only is it the world's leading legal practice management and legal client relationship management software, it also has a really solid core mission to transform the legal experience for all, something I personally support. What sets 𝐤𝐢𝐬𝐬 apart for me is their dedication to customer success and support. There are lots of legal softwares out there, but I know from talking to 𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐬 users that their support offering is miles ahead of the rest, with their 24/5 availability via email, in-app chat, and over the phone. Yes, you can actually call in and speak to someone. 𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐬 is also the G2 crowd leader in legal practice management, in comparison to 130 legal practice management softwares, and has been for the last 14 consecutive quarters. G2 Crowd is the world's leading business solutions review website. You can check 𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐬's full list of features and pricing at www.𝐤𝐤𝐬𝐬.com/legally-speaking. That's www.CLIO.com/legally-speaking. Now back to the show.
And I really want to sort of hammer that message home, because if you're listening to this and that's hitting a note with you, take action, start sharing, because there will be other people. If you're thinking it, there definitely will. And we live in a world now where we're craving authentic human connection. And, I've been working with LinkedIn. I've just come off their Creator Accelerator program last year, and really understand that LinkedIn is pushing this, because whilst we work in these potentially perceived high profile, important, highly pressured roles, we are all still human. And, that is the thing we need to increase, that human connection, despite we move more to an online world. So I want to personally thank you, Ellie, for the work you have done and actually sharing that, because I actually think you're helping people, and it's almost selfish not to. So you've done yourself and the community and built a wonderful community off the back of it. So thank you, because you openly share on LinkedIn how your faith guides your principles personally and professionally. So can you just tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. And this is one of those things, faith and principles, that I was hiding at work for a long time, and I felt very lonely and isolated. I felt like this is a gauntlet that I was running myself, and I didn't feel like I had very much support or even people that I could talk to about it. So in the vein of expressing myself openly and expressing the challenges that I face, I started talking about how difficult it's been for me to hide my faith at work and not feel comfortable being my true self at work. And one of the ways that most prominently manifests is my observance of Shabbat. So being an observant Jew, I observe the Sabbath, and I observe it strictly from Friday night to Saturday night. And that means that as an M&A lawyer, even if I have a incredibly tense, high-pressure transaction going on, I have to turn off my phone and computer at Friday night when the sun goes down to Saturday night when the sun goes down. I turn my phone and computer back on, and I'm inundated by thousands of emails. And I found it very difficult to express how meaningful Shabbat was for me. Shabbat for me was a time that I stepped back and I realized that I am not just Ellie the lawyer, but I'm Ellie, and I have values and I have an identity that is separate from the amount of production I can do during the week. I have value separate from the amount of hours that I bill during the week. And Shabbat is a profound way that I stay mentally healthy, physically healthy, and retain a deep connection to my family and my faith, of course. So I wanted to express that. And I wanted to express that even though observing Shabbat has been challenging throughout my career and has reduced opportunities in certain linear ways, and there's no question about that. And when people come to me and they say, hey, I observe Shabbat, I want to be an M&A lawyer, but I don't want to face any consequences, I say, well, you will face consequences. However, the benefit of observing Shabbat and taking 25 hours out to dedicate to your own mental health and growth and meaningful thoughts is going to pay massive dividends down the road. But it's not without consequences. And so I wanted to express that, and I have, it's been incredibly impactful for me, both in my acceptance at work and connecting with other people who face similar challenges across the faith spectrum, from Muslim, Christian, Seventh-day Adventists, Church of the Latter-day Saints, lots of different people who all face similar difficulties in expressing their faith openly and honestly.
Well, thank you for, once again, all that you do and for sharing your experiences, because the more we talk about this and air things, hopefully we can overcome some of those challenges. And I guess that leads on to law firms. What can law firms do to be more supportive of their workers who want to practice their faith so they can overcome these potential challenges?
It's a very good question. And I would say just take a look at my law firm, Gibson Dunn, to see how to create an open, welcoming environment for people of all different faiths, colors, backgrounds, people who want to feel that they can express their diversities and idiosyncrasies at work. My firm has created what we believe is the first Sabbath observant affinity group at a big law firm. And so this is a group for people like me who observe Sabbath, or any other faiths who observe Sabbath, to join and to create a community, like we talked about earlier, a value-based community where we can talk about some of the challenges, pros, cons, drawbacks of observing the Sabbath. And so, but more than that, it makes us feel seen and recognized by the firm that this is not something that's going to be counting against us. This is something that is welcomed and embraced by my firm. And that is so impactful. But it's all the other things that the firm has done, from having a panel on, we had a firm-wide diversity panel on faith in the workplace where that I moderated, and we had several partners, a Jewish, Christian, and Muslim partner, talk about how faith has guided their journey as partners in a big law firm. But it's so many other things, from putting out messages before the holidays. It's from, training people, doing interviews on how to be sensitive to people of faith. And it's guides and trainings to partners on how to understand and be sensitive to Shabbat observance. So there are so many things, but most of all, it's just making people of different diversities and faiths feel recognized and heard and wanted in that environment.
Yeah, and it's such a great point, because we talk a lot about belonging on the show, and that's a great example there of some of the great things, practical things. It's actually not as difficult or as hard as people may perceive. It's being willing to have the conversation, to become educated and take action. So thank you for sharing some of those super practical tips. So going back to the online world and edutainment, we must talk about TikTok, because you have a little number of followers over there and you've amassed over 43,000 likes and use it to educate others. So it's phenomenal what you've achieved online, not just on one platform. You're taking it to the short form video platform. What do you think is the significance of social medias for lawyers today?
Rob, I'm so embarrassed that I have TikTok as a 35-year-old corporate lawyer. I dragged my feet for a very long time. A couple of years I've been dragging my feet, and only recently opened an account and started posting some videos. It's difficult for me. However, on LinkedIn, I'm preaching to the choir. They're my people. I absolutely love them. It's a supportive, welcoming environment. I have a community there that is overwhelmingly positive and supportive. I realized at some point that if I want my message of acceptance in law and humanity in law and faith and being able to be a good family man and father to resonate with people at the beginning of their career, I needed to reach out on a platform where they were present. And TikTok has a much younger crowd. They are present. They are active there. They are nasty at times. It's one of the nastiest platforms I've ever encountered. The comments, oh my God. I've learned to have a bit of a thicker skin on TikTok. But that's where the young people are, and I think that's where I can impact people at the beginning of their careers. And so you ask, what's the significance on social media for lawyers today? I don't do it in order to increase my business or anything like that. I do it simply to have an impact on other people. However, I believe that social media is a great place for us to represent who we are and what our values are. So there are 1,000 lawyers out there. There are 1,000 great M&A lawyers out there. I believe I'm the best M&A lawyer out there, but there are many others. But people are going to choose to work with me because they connect with my values and who I am. And I think it's important to get on social media, and we can all, draft those alerts about the latest issue in corporate law, but get out there and talk about who you are. Get out there and talk about what you love to do. Do you love hiking? Do you love fishing? Do you love anything else? Like, those are the things that people are going to connect with, and people want to work with people who share their values. And so I think that is one of the primary benefits of social media.
And that's absolutely gold, what you've just shared there, Ellie. And I remember last year talking at 𝐥𝐬𝐬𝐿 about, how building a personal brand can actually be one of the best assets you could do as a lawyer. And I think you've given a really good example, because people do business with people they know, like, and trust, right? We're in a human, it's no longer B2B, B2C, it's H to H, it's human to human connection, and the best known will beat the best. So if you get that visibility and you're consistent, then people are going to be knowing you're top of mind. And whilst you're actually practicing your values and what you look for, people are going to come to you. So I love that. Great example, great case study. Keep it up. And yeah, you're meeting people where they're at. If you're trying to influence people, it's maybe not one platform. You have to go multi-platform, and you're absolutely crushing it on TikTok. And I'd encourage people to give you a follow, both on TikTok, but also on LinkedIn. And switching back to LinkedIn, you are passionate about sharing that you are a husband, #LawDad and lawyer. So how do you balance it all? Because you work at one of the world's, top law firms, you're a husband, you've got #LawDad and the lawyer. How does it all fit together? What's the magic pill?
The magic pill is #LawDad. I created the #LawDad because I wanted to say, first and foremost, that the two are not mutually exclusive. You can love law and be absolutely dedicated to career and be a deeply engaged dad. And the two go together hand in glove. They are not mutually exclusive. So the starting point is knowing that we as dads can do it both. And I think a lot of these principles apply to moms as well. Moms have been doing it for years and doing it with one hand tied behind their back, when dads have not even realized that there is such a thing as balance for absolutely years. And I take my hat off to them, and I am in absolute admiration of these moms that have been doing it with little to no recognition for so many years. But I'm not a mom, so I'm hesitant to talk about what it feels like in their position. So I'll talk about being a dad, even though many of the principles I think are carry over. But I remember growing up, and I had understood from my father and his father before him that being a great father means, first and foremost, providing for your family, putting food on the table. And if you really were an A+ gold star dad, you played catch with your kid on the weekend for a few minutes in between reading the newspaper and watching the ball game, you made some time to pat your son on the back and play some baseball catch with him, right? That was my conception of being a great dad. And I started out my career with that conception in mind, because those were my role models and those were the dads I'd seen. And I remember at one time and coming home after I had just done a very difficult deal, and I'd slept in the office for a couple nights, and I came home to my family and I wanted to share the success with them. And in my mind, as I was driving home and before I walked in the door, I thought to myself, I do this all for my family. I don't do this for myself. I do this, and this is the way I show my love for my family. I show my love for them by providing a beautiful home for them and allowing them to buy whatever they need to buy, right? That is the way I'm showing my love. Like, that should be sufficient. And when I walk in the door now, I should be embraced and exalted and loved for being an amazing dad. And when I opened the door and walked in, my kids ran away from me, right? They looked at me. My son was very young at the time. My wife was holding my daughter, and my daughter snuggled into my wife and didn't want to come to me. And my son ran and hid. And I thought to myself, hey, hold on, this is not the life I want. I cannot, if being successful at work means me not being connected with my family and not being connected with my children and my wife, it's not worth it for me. So I need to, figure out how to do them both. And I sat down with my wife and we had an emotional conversation, and there may have been tears shed, and those tears may have been my tears, confidentially speaking. But I said to myself, like, how can I do this? How can I do both? And my wife said, you can do it. You can love the law and you can be a dad, and you can do them both. And they are not mutually exclusive. And it's not only for our kids, right? We know that kids need deeply engaged parents, and having a deeply engaged mom is not enough. You need to have a deeply engaged dad. It's so funny. I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but I coach my son's wrestling team now, which is a huge time commitment, but I love wrestling, and we could do a whole podcast on the benefits of wrestling. But my son, who's now 9 years old, I finally convinced him to start wrestling. And yesterday we had a wrestling tournament, and my son did incredible at the tournament. Humble brag, he's an incredible wrestler. And so, but I looked around when I was coaching him there, and I saw the kids who were winning. And the kids who were winning were the kids whose parents were coaches. And after them, the kids who were winning were the kids who had parents who were watching them at the tournament. And lastly, the kids who were there dropped off at the tournament without parents watching them, parents who were engaged, were not winning. And it's sad to see, but parents must, moms and dads must be involved with their kids for them to succeed and excel. But it's not just for them, it's for us. I, as a dad, must feel deeply engaged with my family for my to work at my top abilities. I must, to be an amazing lawyer, to be the best at what I'm doing, to stay up all night and still stay sharp, I need to know that I'm deeply engaged with my family. And it's not a desire, it's a necessity.
Yeah, it's such a great message that you mentioned there, and it's what I always say when it comes to this: pay attention and be present. There's a difference between being in the room and being in the room, right? The difference to dad, to yeah, to yes, tell me, I really want to know, right? And this isn't, rocket science once again, but I think you give a really valuable message there that you absolutely can make this happen and not mutually exclusive. And yeah, you're doing a fantastic job, wonderful role model, and really appreciate you sharing that. And before we wrap up, we're gonna get a final bit of wisdom for you on, people with their careers. What would be your top 3 tips for those starting their career in the legal profession in 2023 and beyond?
I have to figure out how to narrow it down to 3, because as you can see, I like to give many tips, and I've learned so many things along the way that I'd love to convey. But if I was to say 3 things, it's that at the beginning or even throughout your career, define your values. Define who you are. Are you somebody that wants to be 100% committed to your work, or do you have other values outside of work? How are your values expressed in your work, right? Because we're all doing what we're doing because we love it. We love M&A. I love M&A. So that's the first thing is get clear on your values so that everything else can follow from there. The second thing is that in law, there are peaks and valleys. It's not just in work, right? There are obviously work peaks and valleys. Times you're busier and less busy, but there are also emotional peaks and valleys. There are times where you're celebrating and times where you feel like absolute garbage, right? And just know that that is part of the journey, right? Failing is part of the journey. Succeeding is part of the journey. There are peaks and valleys in this profession and in this journey. And the last thing I would say is develop ways to cope with failure. We all fail, right? I have even people with the glossiest LinkedIn bio have failed, are failing, sometimes on a daily basis. And we need to develop ways, especially people who are sensitive, and I categorize myself in that way. We need to develop ways of making sure those failures don't throw us off the course. So I have ways that I cope with them, but I encourage others to just find those ways that work for you to cope with failure. It is normal.
Yes, such great wisdom there. And it just reminds me of the quote that I've said, I think, a few times on the show by Winston Churchill. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And I think that just lands the point so beautifully. So, Ellie, before we wrap up this incredible episode, if our listeners, which I'm sure they will, by the way, want to learn more about your journey, what would be the best way for them to contact you? Feel free to shout out those magic social media handles and any web links, and we'll also share them with this episode for you too.
Amazing, Rob. Thank you so much. So first and foremost, you see that I've mentioned my wife several times throughout this podcast. I'm absolutely nothing without her. She runs circles around me in terms of wisdom and health and mental health and physical health. So I first want to shout out her social media handle. And if there's one follow you're going to do today, follow her. Your life will be enriched for it. So her Instagram, she's on Instagram and TikTok, and her handle on both is Shy Albrecht, SHAIALBRECHT, same last name, and she's an absolutely amazing page. And so mine, you're welcome to follow me on LinkedIn, Ellie Albrecht. I'm on TikTok as, I think, Lawdad Ellie. You'll find me. So I look forward to connecting with you.
Yeah, absolutely, they will find you. And what a great thing you mentioned there, particularly with your wife. And I always say we is greater than me. So you're a great team. So I absolutely love that. And thank you so much, Ellie, for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on, as I knew it would be. So from all of us on the Legally Speaking podcast, we'd like to wish you lots of continued success with your career, #LawDad, and everything else that comes your way in the future. But for now, from all of us, over and out.
That brings to the end of season 6. What an incredible season we've had here on the Legally Speaking podcast. I would just like to say a huge thank you to all of our listeners, all of our guests, and everyone within the community for your support and producing such high value content, which has been educating, entertaining, and inspiring so many of you around the world. Stay tuned, keep an eye out on our social media handles and on our Discord for news, updates about season 7. We can't wait. But for now, over and out. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like the content here, why not check out our world-leading content and collaboration hub, the Legally Speaking Club, over on Discord. Go to our website, www.legallyspeakingpodcast.com, for the link to join our community there. Over and out.